Chapter 1 A Flight of Fantasy. Eleanor sits curled up on the couch, feet tucked underneath her, the fingers of her left hand idly stroking the curve of her stomach, her right hand holding the book that she's not reading. The record on the player softly hisses, hops to the next song with a crackle. Her hair is sweaty in the summer heat, lying clammy against her forehead. It's a humid heat, too. There's rain coming in the afternoon. She loves the heat. She loves the rain, too, the wild thunderstorms this country brings, very far removed from the cool, misty weather of the rainy country her thoughts had drifted to. In about an hour it'll be lunchtime, and the menfolk and Tamara will come in with their noise and stir her and the whole house into activity. But for now, it's her and the music and the house at rest. She sighs, stretches her legs out from under her, wiggling her bare toes in front of her. "Be careful," the doctor had said, smiling. "You're very healthy, missus, but you are 40 years old. Rest as much as you can, eat well, and call me at any time you feel worried." And so she has these times of self-indulgence and daydreams. Being pregnant at 40 doesn't make her feel old. It makes her feel about 20 again, full of dreams and promise and the things you feel at 20. 20 was a time to fall in love. She had done so much more than fall in love. She had seen a world war and lived and loved and grieved and lost. And how she had loved. How young she had been and how quickly she had had to grow up and learn that everything could change in the blink of an eye. May this child never see times like that. And Tamara, her first, her wild-haired girl. Tamara turns 18 in 3 months. May her children see different times, softer times. For her, in a different country, 20 years ago, there had not been many soft times. 20 years ago, the year had been 1940, and the town had been a little place long forgotten in the mists of time and the rains of England. It had been centered around the RAF base. Both the base and the small town were now in ruins, abandoned in the post-war years when larger bases and peacetime had meant its demise. Thunder rumbles in the distance and lends atmosphere to her reverie. It had rained that day. Of course it had. The day had a chill to it and the lark was quiet. It was early hours and she knew it would pick up later. Duncan O'Connor was still sitting in the kitchen behind the bar, smoking his pipe and reading the newspaper. He would come to the front later when the bustle started. She liked his comforting presence then. He was a hefty, middle-aged Irishman with a bad hip, friendly but stern, and he ran a very tight ship. His bar girls were decent lasses and treated with respect. It was not the sort of place where goings-on were tolerated. She was glad of that. She was young, inexperienced, and a bit shy. It was good to have Duncan at her back when things got too rowdy. Home was currently with her married sister Janice, after their father had accepted a commission to India and their mother had left shortly after to join him. Father was a military surgeon and mother ever a devoted wife. She missed her parents, but of course it was a whole experience to be a mostly independent wage earner, and in the early days of 1940 life was exciting and the threat was still vague. She had been working at the bar for a month now and had started to settle into the rhythm of things. During rush hours, Duncan bartended and she waitressed. But when it was quiet, she handled most of the bartending as well and let him do his reading and smoking. She was wiping down tables and making sure everything was ready for the late afternoon and evening rush. She was keeping an eye on the door, expecting Johnny. She knew he would have been flying sorties today, scouting the coastline and keeping an eye out for enemy aircraft. She was looking forward to his company and a break in the monotony of the day. At some point she thought she heard the drone of aircraft in the distance, but it could have been thunder. One of the village regulars came in and she sent him through to Duncan at the back, where they would play checkers while it was quiet. The rain started coming down harder, and this time it was definitely thunder. It was then that Johnny Riley ducked through the droplets in the doorway. The short Irishman shook the rain from his black hair like a dog, his blue eyes narrowing in merriment. "Elle, my sweetheart, doesn't it just make the sun shine to see you? Would you light up my life with a double whiskey then, please, coz?" The endearments rolled off his tongue easily as the smile came to his face. Johnny brought a room to life. Short, compact, with a slight curl to his hair, the hint of a dimple in his cheek, black brows accenting his blue-eyed expression, and a sardonic twist to his mouth. Duncan had branded him as trouble and kept a glowering eye on him. Johnny seemed not to notice and was always remarkably happy to see Duncan when he made his appearance. "Keep an eye on that lad. He's up to no good, and don't be letting him charm you. I know his type from a very long way off." She laughed. "I grew up with him, Duncan. His mother was my step-aunt. We spent almost every holiday together getting up to no good. There's nothing you can tell me about Johnny I don't already know, and he does have a heart of gold. And a tongue of silver, because he could, and would, charm the absolute pants off most people." She adored Johnny. He was her friend and ally and brother, and she never quite figured out exactly how he managed to get a listing at the airfield in the town she moved to within a week after she had arrived there. He had sent a telegram that he would see her shortly, and so he did. Bags and flying jacket and a thick layer of brogue-covered swagger. He dropped in most afternoons and would sit for long hours talking to her when things were quiet and the weather didn't allow flying. He was a Spitfire pilot now, and he wore the glamour of it cheerfully and ostentatiously. He had the lilt of the Irish in his voice, and his stories drew her pictures of the way clouds looked from above, the smell of a Spitfire's cockpit, and the thrill of contour chasing. He made her laugh, and he brought home closer. He also made a point of taking her home at closing time, dropping her off with a kiss on the cheek. Sundays he would often join them for lunch, and it was like the old days when they would lie in the orchard and daydream as cloud shapes passed over them. She poured Johnny a whiskey and rolled up his tab. "Come sit with me, Elle." He patted the bar stool next to him. She laughed. "You know that's frowned upon. Let me make a cup of tea and sit on this side of the bar, then it at least looks like I'm on the job." She brought the kettle to the boil and poured herself a cup. From the kitchen, the smell of the soup Duncan's wife was stirring up, and the soft bicker of voices over the checkerboard drifted through. "What's the plan, coz?" Johnny asked out of the blue. "What plan?" "For you. This war isn't going to be thus peachy and mellow much longer. What's your ideas? What do you want to do? Where would you like to go? I'd honestly rather you were further away from the war than living in an air-based town." She shrugged. "I don't know. I've been thinking of what I meant to do, what I wanted to do with my life when war happened and Dad got sent to India and Mom went with. I'm sort of hanging now, and I want to stay close to Jan and to you." Johnny deepened his dimples at her. "Love, I'm a wild goose. I blow where the wind does. We want better for you." She smiled serenely at him. "I turn 20 in a few months, Johnny. I'll figure it out. There's not much point in wanting to travel the world and designing grand plans while the world is deciding exactly how and where to war." He shrugged, light-hearted again. "'Tis true, but I would still like you to have a plan if things got worse." He took a swig of whiskey and she looked at him through lowered lashes over her tea. Dear Johnny. But it would be all right, and she had family close to her. He interrupted her thoughts, veering sharply off course as he was inclined to. "Actually, I have a favor to ask, cuz, and I want you to run it past Jan. I'd like to bring a friend on Sunday. He's a Canadian, a good lad." He hasn't any folks, I think, neither here nor in his country, and getting him to meet some people might just do him good. He's house-trained and well-mannered. Jan will like him." "Why must I ask? You're the one who knows him." "My sweet Elle, Jan is on that phase of wedded bliss where she's desperately searching for a husband for her little sister, and any and all friends that are not in the state of courting or marrying. If you ask, she'll be too happy to oblige. If I ask, she will immediately lock up the wine and the silverware from the brigands that I spend my time with." Eleanor took a sip of her tea. "All right, I'll give you that. That is an accurate summary if I've ever heard one. But how am I to lay my honor on the line for this Canadian fellow, knowing the company he keeps?" "Oh, he knows no better. And I did take the liberty of telling him to meet me here this afternoon so you can inspect him." He glanced down at his watch. "To be punctual, exactly 11 minutes ago, which might mean the blighter has docked out." "I would have docked out too if you told me to meet you somewhere to be inspected." "I told him I'm meeting my cousin for a beer and he should come." "I'm not your cousin, and that is not a beer." "I am caught in a web of my own deceit." Johnny gestured dramatically. "And yet I suspect I have spotted approach." Wet boots sounded on the steps and a young flyer stepped into the door. He was wearing a flying jacket and he was bareheaded despite the rain, dark brown hair wet, falling tangled over his forehead. He was tall and wide-shouldered and he had to wipe the rain from his eyes before looking up. When he did, he caught her completely off guard. It was the strangest thing. His eyes were a very deep brown and he looked straight into her grey ones. She wondered if he had the wind knocked from him too, because it seemed that way. There was something utterly familiar about his eyes, and yet she couldn't put a word to it. The world did an entire rotation in quite the wrong way, and only then did she draw a breath again and shake herself from the spell. Johnny had raised eyebrows. "Elle, this is Danny O'Neill. He's my mate from Canada. Danny, this is my cousin Eleanor Davies. She's from across 2 roads. We've been invited for lunch at theirs on Sunday." Glib little Irish bastard. She laughed inside. But Danny had stepped forward, reached out his hand, and she took it. "Pleased to meet you, ma'am, and thank you. It'll be an honor." Oh, most definitely he was house-trained, and with that accent and soft-spoken ways, Janice would certainly just love him. She blinked slowly and smiled at him. "How do you do, Danny? We're looking forward to having you," she said in her most elegant finishing school manners, and then knocked her teacup over. So Johnny achieved what he set out to do, and she suggested to Janice that she would like to invite a friend of Johnny's to Sunday lunch, because he seemed a decent fellow, and Johnny had asked because he was quite out of his depth in a strange country. She wondered about Johnny's motive and Johnny's friend. Johnny was forever bringing her things, shells and flowers, and once when they were younger, a kitten he had found in a hedge. This felt rather the same. Janice had a roast chicken going, and Eleanor set about a hot potato salad. It was a cheerful family affair, these Sunday lunches. Tim was home and he liked making dessert. She loved Janice's big blonde husband. He always had a joke up his sleeve, treated her like a real sister he actually liked having in the house, and made sure that her and Jan's wine glasses didn't get empty. There was laughter and bustle all around. They ended up waiting more than an hour for Johnny and his friend. Janice started getting agitated, but Tim put another record on the gramophone, grabbed her by the hand and whirled her around him so her loose red hair flew, and she inevitably laughed. "Relax, my love. No doubt duty called and they'll be back soon. In fact, I'm pretty sure I heard a flight go up when I was out in the garden earlier." He was right, and half an hour later they heard Johnny's beat-up car in the lane in front of the house. Johnny opened the kitchen door. He was at home enough to let himself in and stomped the mud off his boots. "Jan, my love, sorry for making you wait. Someone thought they spotted U-boats off the coast, so we had to check it out. But it turns out to have been some old lady who would have got a fright when she saw the spots on our glasses. This is Danny O'Neill. He's from Canada and joined the RAF because he thought we might need a hand, and the most wranglers don't have proper aircraft to fly over there. Isn't that right, Danny? This is my cousin Janice. You've met Eleanor at the bar. They're sisters, and you might or might not have run into Tim in the hangars. He's Jan's husband and bloody good at keeping a Spitfire airworthy. Danny stepped through the door from behind Johnny's back and smiled, extending a hand to Janice. Pleased to meet you, ma'am, and thank you for your kind invitation. Tim, thank you for having me. We actually spoke the other day in the hangar. Eleanor, great to see you, and thank you. He solemnly had a handshake for each of them. Eleanor could immediately see Jan's delight at his well-mannered, soft-spoken way and the slow, emphasized accent. You're welcome, Danny. We're pleased to have you. O'Neill sounds Irish. Do you have family here? Not any living that I know of, ma'am. My great-grandfather on my father's side was some kind of Irish privateer who ended up settling in America. My grandfather, my mom's dad, was from Ireland originally, but he farmed in Canada. I still have an aunt there, and she sounds about as Irish as it gets. Please just call me Janice. I'm barely older than you, and we're all friends here. Tim put his one hand on his wife's shoulder with a bottle of whiskey in his other. I know Johnny's going to join me. Danny, would you like to have one? That would be very kind, thank you. Just a single, please. He had to speak hurriedly as Tim started pouring very generously. Janice laughed. Keep an eye on him, Danny. Him and Johnny pour like sailors. Shall we move through to the dining room? The food has been getting cold for an hour now. They sat down and Tim said grace, afterwards filling up Jan's and Eleanor's glasses. The sky darkened outside with promise of rain, and Janice got up to light candles. Why don't we just turn on the lights? Johnny grinned at her through his half-cold potato salad. Ambiance, John. Jan looked down her nose at him. That is just an upper-class word for I can't see me food. Word to the wise from a married man. If you let them light the candles, they're less inclined to comment on how you pour the whiskey. It's the ambiance, I think. Eleanor caught Danny's eyes across the table. He gave her a little nod and his smile widened for a moment before he looked away. Jan's candles did do something as rain started falling outside. It drew the whole room together and lent a softness to everything. There was intimacy and warmth in the room. The war was far away. They had Tim's bread and butter pudding for dessert and moved to the sitting room. Jan lit a fire and the easy-going closeness enveloped them. Where are you from in the United States, Danny? Tim asked casually. Danny's head jerked up. How did you know? I've met and worked with a bunch of Canadians in my life. I know a Canadian when I hear one. You're not it. Danny laughed. I'm from Rome, actually. Rome in Georgia. I was born there and I spent my whole life in that area till I got it in my head to come here. I would really appreciate it if you kept it between us. I could still get in a fair amount of trouble. Our lips are sealed. We appreciate the help and the risk you boys take with the neutrality clauses over there. From what I've heard, it's one hell of an issue if you get caught. I've heard 10 years in prison being mentioned. It's a pretty big deal, yeah. Believe me, I was afraid of getting caught the whole time. This time it was Jan who chimed in. What brought you here? I wanted to fly. I wanted to make a difference, and I desperately wanted the chance to make something out of myself. I learned to fly when I was 17, and it became the main thing I wanted to do. Dean, my coach, mentor, flew in France in the Great War, and honestly, I think if he was still young enough and his wife would let him, he would have been here before me. Anyway, it seemed my life was kind of stuck in a rut, and Dean encouraged me to come join the Air Force. I went to meet my aunt over the border. She helped me work out a plan.
I came over to Ireland on a fake business mission for their timber mill and then enlisted as a Canadian. And your parents? What did they think of it? Jan was curious. She never minded asking people about themselves. They both died just after I turned 16. I had to drop out of school and Dean helped me get a job. They were building a flying club on a piece of country just outside the city, and at first I helped with the loose jobs on the farm and with the construction. Soon the airplanes had my attention harder than anything else. Dean had a shop with camel he rebuilt, and he showed me the ropes. Later on, he helped me touch up on my school subjects and actually go to night school and write my exams, get a pilot's license. I taught flying for a bit, and then we talked about the RAF thing, and I came here, enlisted and started training and so on, and arrived here just before Christmas. Is it very different here? It's very cold here. We have an almost Mediterranean weather in Georgia. Tropical storms and hurricanes, and the winters aren't that cold. It took me a while to get used to the temperatures here. Must have been difficult to spend your first Christmas in a new country on an airbase in wartime. He smiled at her again, the same quick, warm smile, with a little kink in the corner of his mouth. It wasn't bad. I've really been kind of on my own for 6 years now. We did have quite good food, and the lads had a good time. Festive, even. He glanced at Johnny, and the smile got wider. Johnny's the kind of person who just lights up a gathering. Janice scoffed and looked at Johnny with a doubt of long familiarity. Johnny leaned back, laughed, stuck his feet on her coffee table. What he means is that I put flares down the chimney. You're going to be court-martialed the way you go on. Do you have to put your feet on my furniture? Sorry, Mother, Johnny mocked, but removed his feet in a hurry. Don't you mother me or you'll get your ears boxed. Eleanor, shall we go do the dishes and leave the men to their whiskey? But as she got up, the young American hastily leapt to his feet. Why don't I do that? It's the least I can do. You've been a wonderful hostess and chef, and I would love to at least help clean up. Janice looked doubtful and Johnny quite amused beyond containment. You're a guest, Danny. Relax. Eleanor and I don't mind. Sit down, Jan. Let the youngsters handle it and drink your wine. Eleanor, you've got help, and commandeer Johnny if you need more. Janice sat back down, half uncertainly. Thank you then, Danny, but it's really not necessary. If I do my share, then I have a chance to get invited back for more of your amazing cooking. Mess hall food gets boring after a while, and I'll gladly wash up. I'm sure we'll handle it, Jan. If he can fly a plane, he should be able to dry dishes. I'll call if he's incompetent. They started clearing up dishes in silence. Her mind was quite blank on all possible ideas of conversation. Finally, he spoke quietly as she was rinsing out the first dishes. I think it would be better if I washed and you dried off and put away, since I have no idea where anything goes. Oh, of course, thank you. Did you have to sound so dumb? I actually wanted to have a word with you. Oh? She was startled. I got the impression that the invitation was Johnny's idea, and it might have made you uncomfortable. You've barely spoken this whole time. I don't want to inconvenience you in any way. He was incredibly earnest about it too. He had the dishcloth wrung around one hand and was twisting it anxiously. Below that quiet charm, he was shy. She suddenly realized and smiled. I'm not inconvenienced, Danny, or uncomfortable. Please don't worry. He wasn't convinced, stood very quiet, measuring her expression against her words. You haven't really spoken, and you seemed so put out when Johnny introduced us. She looked up, met his eyes. There was that same thing again. She took the dishcloth from him. I'll dry off with this one. You wash then. She stepped around. I wasn't put out. I was caught off guard. You see, I think Johnny is very cleverly trying to set us up, Danny. He froze mid-movement. I'm so sorry. I had not. That had never even crossed my mind. Why are you sorry? She was smiling. His dark brown eyes looked at her intently, and his agitation eased a bit. He had incredibly long, thick eyelashes, and those eyes, they were striking. I'm not, I suppose. I just don't want to distress you. I'm not in distress. Don't you mind then? I don't think so. Do you? The long lashes lowered as he blinked down into the dishwater. He shook his head slowly, looked up at her very clearly, honestly. No, then I don't mind. And I would want to see you again, I think, if you wanted. You could walk me home tomorrow. It's my night off, so I'll get off at 5. If you're right about it, Johnny will be smug. Johnny will be smug anyway. She laughed. Did he honestly put flares down the chimney? His reservation slipped a little bit, and she watched him as he told the story. His mouth made that little kink in the corner when he smiled. There was something earnest in him, something that drew you in. And there were those extraordinary eyes. She liked him.